Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are live. Welcome to another edition of Tenant Tuesdays at 2. My name is Kadeem Morris. I'm an attorney here in the housing unit at Community Legal Services. This is our weekly conversation on issues related to tenants living in Philadelphia and to a certain extent outside of Philadelphia. Tenant Tuesdays at 2 is made possible by the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. Each week we cover a different topic, so we encourage folks to come back weekly or join us on Facebook Live or YouTube, where the presentation will be available in Spanish after we're done wrapping here. So for today, I'm joined by Sherry Thomas. Sherry is the director of the Housing Initiative at Legal Clinic for the Disabled. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Kadeem.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Today's conversation is going to focus on the services that are being provided by Legal Clinic for the Disabled during the COVID-19 pandemic period, and to a certain extent, what their day-to-day looks like on a regular basis. And we will also be talking about the emergency housing protections, which are a set of 5 bills that are now before City Council for consideration. I believe they're up for their second reading and possible vote this week. So we will be having that conversation to see how those protections will impact both of our client populations and why it really matters to support these bills as they move through City Council. So just by way of general updates, municipal courts are currently set to reopen in July. I believe the current order goes on till July 10th. If you are a tenant who was previously scheduled to be in eviction court either in April or May, you may be receiving a notice in the mail now, or you may have already received a notice that is rescheduling your court case to sometime in July or August or even September. So be on the lookout for that. And we encourage you to reach out to either of our organizations if you need help and you qualify for our services. We will do our best to help you. The Fair Housing Commission is currently accepting complaints through their online form. So if you Google Fair Housing Philadelphia, the commission's webpage should come up and enable you or direct you to how to file a complaint if you want to raise issues of habitability or other concerns that you may be having, either related to the pandemic or not related to the pandemic. So let's get started. Sherry, happy to have you here and talk about LCD and the amazing work that you guys have been doing and will continue to do. So what is Legal Clinic for the Disabled?
All right. Hi, Kadeem. Thanks for having me on today. Legal Clinic for the Disabled has been involved with the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project since the beginning. And so I'm happy to be here to talk about what that looks like at our clinic. So the Legal Clinic, we serve low-income individuals with physical disabilities and mental health disabilities. It is not required that you are on a Social Security disability payment or on SSI to get our services. When we define disabilities, we define them pretty broadly. So this includes chronic conditions too. So asthma, diabetes, kidney disease, COPD. If you are a cancer survivor, if you have hypertension, these are all things that could qualify you for Legal Clinic services. So if sometimes when people see the name Legal Clinic for the Disabled, they think, oh, I need to be getting a disability payment to actually get the services, and that's not true. So the best way to find out if you're eligible is to give us a call. We give direct legal services in all areas of civil law, including landlord-tenant, family law, public benefits, simple wills, powers of attorney, guardianships, and utilities. If there's a legal issue that you're not sure if we handle or not, the best thing is to still call and we'll assess. Usually if there's something that we can't handle, we're able to refer to another legal agency or give some advice and send you away with some information. So our goal at Legal Clinic is really to make sure that no one leaves empty-handed, that every call does have some benefit to it. Yeah, Kadeem, were you
So
going to
that's a pretty expansive definition of disabled. I think probably more broader than what I myself would have traditionally think as that meant in this context. And I'm happy to see that we go as far as including chronic conditions that people may not necessarily think about. And it also allows you to not necessarily like, not only do we sometimes place an age restriction on like theoretical people with disabilities, because we think of them as a certain subset of our population, but we also don't necessarily include things like hypertension, asthma, and other conditions. And it's great that you guys can provide legal services to all of those populations. So my next question, and it's a question that comes up all the time when we talk about disabled or differently abled populations, what does accessibility look like for those populations, both in the context of courtroom services, which is something that's a big topic right now with the pandemic, and just in general, like being able to navigate the world on a day-to-day?
Well, it really is, depends on your disability and what specifically you're dealing with. So we aspire to provide holistic services for our clients. So when you come in, you will, and when I say come in, we actually don't have any in-person intake. So that's one way that we stay accessible to all of our clients and anyone who would want to avail the services, is that we always have had telephone intake. So if you're not able to leave your home, or it's difficult for you to come into the office, if you need interpreter services over the telephone, we're able to do that either through language line or through services for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. All of those things happen over the telephone. So we conduct our telephone intake during COVID. It's open Monday through Friday, every single day, and you can reach us at 215-587-3158. And for landlord tenant, we have a specified line for that, and that's at 215-587-3460. And that is also open Monday through Friday. Now, you talked, Kadeem, about accessibility, especially in court. This is really important now. People with chronic conditions are much more at a high risk to contract COVID and become seriously ill or die from it. And when we talk about who's most at risk, it is folks with these chronic conditions that you mentioned, right? So asthma, diabetes, any underlying respiratory diseases. If you've been receiving cancer treatment or treatment for cancer, you're compromised in that way. So what this will look like in the courts as the courts reopen, we're working with the courts to reopen safely, but I would encourage you to give us a call so we can talk through what a specific accommodation could mean. That could mean either getting your court date postponed until it is safe for you to actually come in person, or it could mean setting you up to do a video hearing or a telephone hearing or something like that. It really depends on your individual hardship or accommodation that's needed for the disability.
And I think it's great to kind of frame it in the context of not only giving the person control over themselves, but control over how they interact with the court system. Because I think about, I am theoretically in good health, but with like family histories and predispositions to some of these other conditions, the concept of contracting COVID from being in that space that's not really designed for social distancing is something that I think everybody has to now think about in a different way. So I'm happy that you guys are at least able to help people through the process of maybe asking for an extension beyond the pandemic period. And I think we'll talk about a little later how the eviction protection bills kind of come into play and make that a safer system for people. But I'm happy that people can get that on an individual basis. So I know that Legal Clinic for the Disabled has several medical legal partnerships. What do those look like, and what are access points for people?
So the medical legal partnerships, the model is really that you have a lawyer on your healthcare team. So say you go into your doctor's office and you have you're having asthma attacks frequently, and the doctor is giving you prescriptions, you're taking your nebulizer treatments, but for whatever reason, your asthma is not getting better. And then when, you start talking about your living conditions, say you have leaks in your apartment and there's mold forming, and that's why the asthma is not getting better. There's a lawyer on site that is able to talk to you right away and then figure out, oh, this is actually a legal issue. This is an issue with your landlord, and this is something that we should be stepping in on so that you can get better health-wise. So for LCD, we have partnerships with medical clinics and hospitals across the city. This includes partnerships with the Family Practice and Counseling Network. That is 3 nurse-managed health centers in Southwest Philadelphia, Germantown, and North Philadelphia. We have partnerships with Project Home. That's at the Stephen Klein Wellness Center and the Hub of Hope. We also are on site at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children and also on site at McGee Rehabilitation Hospital. Now, prior to COVID and all of us being at home, all of our attorneys were on site at those specific points. And if you wanted to access the services, you would access it through your doctor or as a patient, except for Stephen Klein Wellness Center. The Wellness Center is actually more of a hub and community type center. So even if you're not a patient there, you can just walk in and tell the staff that, oh, I want to see the lawyer on site, and you can get connected to the lawyer. So that specific site, you don't even have to be a patient to get to the lawyer. Now that we're off-site due to COVID and working remotely from home, I just want to let everyone know that we are still have all of our attorneys tied to those sites. And so everyone's available by phone. So if you are still interested in getting the legal services through the Medical Legal Partnership or through the Stephen Klein Wellness Center, for example, even if you're not a patient, you can still go to those places, tell them that you need legal services, and then they can still make the referral to the legal clinic for the disabled.
So the way I'm envisioning this is that it's one less point of contact with an additional system that makes the process of getting help easier for vulnerable populations. So if their medical issue can be tied to their legal issue, or you can actually see whether or not their medical issue is caused by legal issues and take steps to hopefully long-term remedy that problem in a way that's really sustainable to the client and improves their overall health.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We call it's a one-stop shop type of thing. So if you're already, especially if you're dealing with multiple chronic conditions, you might spend a lot of your time in doctor's appointments. So, it's instead of having to travel to Center City, for example, we really, as a clinic, strive to be in the community where our clients are, so it's just easier to access.
I think that is very good and very useful, because I know as we talk about the provision of legal services across the city, there are always those gaps and access points where, right now, to get on SEPTA, to get anywhere, poses a general problem. So having sites out in the community that people can go to and engage with is a very meaningful way of providing services that I think everyone should emulate.
I didn't invent it, but yeah, it's a great model, and we've seen it work pretty well. And it helps too with even just representation of clients. So if the medical issue has to do with your case, we're able to, with our clients' permission, be able to speak with their doctors and their treating medical staff and get some more understanding of what the cases are about.
I could not agree more. So we're going to switch our conversation to talk about the housing emergency protections that are now not in existence, but being worked through City Council, and what that actually means for our client populations. And I'm interested to hear from you, Sherry, what your general perspective on those bills are and why you would encourage folks to support those pieces of legislation.
Sure. The legislation, I think, is really comprehensive. So it addresses a lot of different areas that taken together can really protect renters and get landlords paid at the same time, right? So it's not just one-sided. It can help everyone that's involved. But I wanted to point out that some of the legislation can be really, really helpful for people with disabilities and chronic conditions. So for example, there's a couple of pieces. There's a moratorium being proposed, which means that no lockouts can happen or no evictions can happen until after August 31st, unless there are certain narrow exceptions. This is really important for people with chronic conditions and disabilities because moving during a pandemic is especially risky, right? So if you need to think about the last time you moved, all of what that entailed, right? So you had to go out and look at places. You might be taking public transportation to do that. Maybe you have people coming over to help you to move, right? Pack up things. You're hiring a moving company, whatever you might be doing to move, you're increasing your interaction with people and increasing your interaction with strangers. So during a pandemic, when we're being told to socially distance and stay safe in that way, this is especially risky for people with disabilities. Another thing, there's a diversion program that's introduced as well for some of our clients. So our clients with cognitive issues, stroke survivors, people with learning disabilities, Alzheimer's, mental health issues. The diversion program is really helpful because it gets everyone to the table to actually talk about things, and it gives people time to actually talk about some issues. So I will give you just like a simple example.
So give me 1 second. We're going to pause for a quick bit. I'm trying to pull up my notes and make sure we're on the same page.
Okay.
And now I think, so I would like to, if possible, discuss the bills one at a time.
Sure.
If that works with you. So yeah, and we can start with the diversion program because that's what we're currently talking about. And you were talking about the need for this program as it relates to your clients.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically, and I guess when we think about the disabled population, there's so many different intersections of which a diversion or additional time could be necessary. But what is the specific benefit or the biggest benefit to your client population?
I think the biggest benefit is actually the time and actually getting everyone to the table. So I want to give you just a very brief example of what this could look like. So I handled a case. Now this is before any diversion program, and to be clear, there is no diversion program right now. But I had a client once come in who had a brain injury, and she was living in a property that needed a lot of repairs done. She was trying to communicate with the landlord as best as she could, but her brain injury was making it difficult. So she would, text him and try to get the point across that way and get him to understand what was going on in the house. And because of the disability and the delays in communication and her being able to gather all of her information, when I met her in court, she didn't have everything with her. And so we had to postpone the hearing to try to gather everything together. The place was in total disrepair. She had started withholding her rent because of that. And then by the time we got to the second hearing, the landlord let us know that, yes, I agree, the place is in total disrepair, and I frankly can't afford to fix it. So the best thing right now is for all of us to just part ways. Now, if the diversion program had existed when that happened, we could have avoided 2 court hearings. He probably wouldn't have had to hire a lawyer. And, we would have known much sooner what he was thinking. Then we didn't have to come to court to get that done, right? So the diversion program in this case would have been very helpful because it would have given us the time to get everything together and get everyone to the table. And my client was happy to move once she heard what his intentions were and where his head was, right? So it would actually, by giving people more time, it can actually save time and effort and money because these cases can be resolved.
Yeah, I think it's very important, or we can't understress the fact that having the ability to bring everyone to the table without the high pressure courtroom setting that is just generally out there, and even being able to discuss and have open communication. Because as you said, your client having a brain injury had limited ability to communicate with their landlord, and whether or not it's just for lack of trying or just passage of time, the landlord also was not openly communicating with your client where their head was at in relations to the issue that took place. And this had to go through a court system, which probably ended up with some sort of eviction record on your client's behalf, when that could have been avoided if everyone could have come to the table in a pre-filing diversion program, which is what we're talking about setting up with the city, and have the conversation and see where people are at in terms of, can you make the repairs that are required, or is this the end of the landlord-tenant relationship? And that saves the court time. It saves costs, as you mentioned, with attorneys and other fees for filings and service. So I think it's a mutually beneficial thing if everyone's given the opportunity to talk. And as we think about COVID, I mean, people haven't been able to work for a significant period of time. So there is a population out there that is going to be struggling. And I know it's on both sides of the aisle, both the landlords and the tenants are struggling, but we have to create some sort of forum where people can talk and try to resolve things without the high pressure. You will be evicted or you will get a judgment at the end of that conversation, because I think it changes the tenor of what people are willing to do. And as we talk about that, that brings me to the next program, which is the payment plan program, because I think those two things fit together very intrinsically. If you're going to do a diversion program, there should be a way for someone to get on a payment plan. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are around that program.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, just to give a brief overview of what the payment plan is, what the proposed legislation is, it is basically that if you as a tenant show your landlord that you're having a financial hardship because of COVID, whether that means you've lost income or you've had an increase in expenses because of COVID, lost your job, maybe you're taking care of somebody else because they've had to self-quarantine. If you present that to your landlord has to come into a payment plan with you for 9 months to give you time to pay back the money. For our client population specifically, again, it's the same type of benefit of having time, and also, yeah, it's the same benefit of having time, right? So we know now that there is money coming in to the state and into the city for rental assistance, but it will take time for people to actually access the rental assistance. Prior to COVID, if you wanted rental assistance, you had to go down in person to Office of Homeless Services. 9 times out of 10, if you went down there, you wouldn't have all of your paperwork together at the same time. So it could be 2 or 3 times before you actually get the assistance. And when you have a disability or something that prevents you from even going somewhere in person, or maybe it takes you a little longer to get your documentation together, then it's really important. And I'll give you another example where this same exact thing happened, where I have a client who had a learning disability, very, very difficult for him to get his documentation together. His landlord scheduled a lockout, and we found out about it 2 days prior. And he was really, all we needed was to get access to this money that the Office of Homeless Services had. So we were able to stop the lockout by filing something in court. He really just needed 1 more week. And so this type of payment plan would have helped him then. Imagine if he didn't have a lawyer, he would have been locked out just 5 days before the money came in. And that really is no good reason to lose your home, because, and the landlord was paid in full, to be clear, that the landlord was made whole, his balance went down to 0, they got all the money they needed. But if we hadn't stepped in at that point, he would have been locked out just because of a matter of days before the assistance came in. So this is where I see the payment plan really, really helping, is that it would be, I think, a tragedy and a shame if there's money sitting in a pot that people should be able to access, but it's just because of timing that they become homeless.
I could not agree with you more. I myself have filled out and submitted rental assistance applications on behalf of clients. And we hear the stories from our clients all the time that if you don't get there first thing in the morning, they've taken all the people they can see for the day by like 8 a.m. And that's not necessarily to say that the system is broken. It's just that there's just so great a need that people have to make this the first thing that they do. And if you are a member of a disabled population, the question is, can you get there at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning? Can you deal with a crowd? It's just so much that's involved in accessing these resources that people don't generally think about. So if we can create or build systems that coordinate everything, whether it's state rental assistance, which is, while it is available, it will become generally available to the public, I think, in the next 2 or 3 weeks through that process, and coordinate that with either the diversion program or stay of eviction so that landlords can know that they will be made whole, because it does not make sense for someone to be evicted today and then have access to money in a week to resolve the issue, because then it's going to cost the city more to house those people while they are homeless. And then it's also going to be a great emotional toll on a family to be ripped from your home in the midst of a pandemic, then have to go and apply for resources without all the paperwork, because no one ever remembers to take everything when you're told that you have to leave your home, and then you have to go back and apply and engage consistently. And it's hard. It's hard for able-bodied people or just individuals with no limitations, not to mention populations that are particularly vulnerable, whether it is to COVID or just any other sort of limitation on their abilities to engage with systems. So I think it's very important for us to stress that. What I really want to touch on is there's a late fee waiver bill, which I think is fantastic, because late fees during a pandemic, when someone doesn't have income to pay you, seems unnecessarily punitive. So I'm curious as to what that bill actually does and how it operates.
Yeah, so that bill, what the bill is proposing is that landlords cannot charge late fees until after 9 months have passed after the end of the emergency period. So the date we're looking at right now, the end of the emergency in this legislation is August 31st, 2020. So for 9 months after that, there can be no late fees charged, and from March 1st till now as well. So I think charging late fees at a time like this, it just seems like you're kicking people who are down. It's like trying to get blood or water from a stone. People are trying to pay their rent. Many of our clients call and they say, I want to pay, I like living here. I need to pay my landlord, but I just can't right now. And so it kind of goes in the same, it offers stability and it offers time, and it lets people kind of dig out of a hole. I don't know how many of you watching this today have ever been in any type of debt, but it can get very, very overwhelming if you think you owe something and then it snowballs into a much bigger number. In Pennsylvania, we don't really have these limits on late fees. So if you have a landlord who is charging, hundreds of dollars a month in late fees, then that can get really, really burdensome.
I agree. And I think it's interesting when we think about like being late on a bill and trying to avoid a late fee, and then also trying to communicate to your landlord that I don't want a late fee because I'm unemployed and I still can't pay you. It becomes a very tough conversation for people to engage in. And I know that everyone's trying to be compassionate and empathetic about everything that's happening, but we have to be able to build systems that removes the individual responsibility for everyone to act right, and just allow people to engage in like a meaningful way. Because when we talk about the housing crisis that will happen, at some point, landlords are going to get stressed out about how many of their clients are suffering hardship unrelated to them. And tenants are going to be stressed out just thinking about how do I communicate with whether it's my landlord, a utility company, or someone else that I'm behind. I'm just starting work. I don't know what it's going to look like if I will have my full hours back. I don't know how my childcare, which is now changed, is going to be impacted. There's just so many things that we just can't pinpoint as pressure points for people as they try to have this conversation, that the need for holistic protections or just a space and time where people can work through these issues is just so dire at this point. So I'm happy that like the bills seem to work together in this really specific way and support the system of the housing system in Philadelphia to really help both landlords and tenants continue to be housed. Because let's face it, if everyone's evicted in the next month or two, there really is no one to replace them because everyone is suffering in some way or shape or form from the pandemic. So to the extent that we can work together, I think that that will be really good. I want to touch on with you kind of a broader discussion on the moratorium, because I know we began to speak about that bill at first, and that seems like the most important, the extension of the moratorium to the end of August, because that seems to create at least a framework within which all of the things that we're talking about can actually happen or work out. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that bill itself.
Yeah, I think the moratorium is important because we as a city are just starting to come out of this gridlock, basically, right? So one of my colleagues used this analogy of, when you're in a traffic jam and the traffic jam starts to let up, not everyone just starts going 60 miles an hour again. You have to start, going slowly. And I think that's a great analogy because that's exactly what's happening here. So people have not been moving out of places where maybe they want to move out from, and have not been able to locate new housing to move into. And so the moratorium will really help in terms of just getting everyone to a stable place so that when those times come when they need to move, they'll be able to actually move. It's going to provide stability and it's going to provide time. It will let people save up, and it will also just give some grace in this time when we all need a little extra grace, is what I'm trying to say.
I never thought of the traffic jam analogy.
I can't take credit for it. That was actually from Jacob Spidell at Senior Law Center. He used that analogy, and I love it because I think that's what's happening. We're all just coming now out of this.
And some of us are at the very back of the traffic jam, trying to see what's happening at the front and have no idea how to engage with the program. So we are beginning to wrap up, and I think my question for you is, how do Philadelphians or tenants who are interested in giving support to this legislation, how do they engage with the process, and what should they be doing at this time?
So this legislation is, it's possible that it's coming up for a vote on Thursday, June 18th. What you can do is you can call your council members or email them and tell them that you support the Emergency Housing Protection Act and all of its bills. So there's 5 bills in the act, and tell them, your council members want to hear from you. You live in their neighborhoods, you are their constituents. So tell them if you support these bills, you call them or you email them and you tell them that that you want to support them. Another way is you can give public testimony. So during the hearing, if you want to be able to actually speak during the hearing, there's a way to do that as well, where you can sign up till the day before to give that testimony.
I think that's great. And it doesn't hurt to spam their mailboxes with the importance of housing, because housing equals health. And I think it's the foundational part from which like every other societal system is then built. And if you don't have a home, like I think about having to work from home at this time, and then parents having to be home, children learning at home, and everything that we were doing as we come out of the pandemic phase or traffic jam, for want of a better term, is happening at home. So if you lose your home, then you can't actually participate in any meaningful way with these systems, and that should not be the outcome in this situation. So I do support the call for everyone to call their local council members and indicate that you are in support of these bills and encourage them to vote on these bills as they come up for a potential vote on Thursday of this week. So Shari, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today and have this conversation. It's been a great conversation. I want to remind people that Legal Clinic for the Disabled is working remotely and available to do intakes and help client populations as the needs arise. They can be contacted for general intake at 215-587-3350. And that's Monday to Friday, general business hours. And thank you for being here. As we wrap, I want to remind people that Tenant Tuesdays at 2 is made possible by the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. A lot of the work that we have been talking about today, and even some of the advocacy around these bills, have been done in collaboration with the members of the Philadelphia Eviction Prevention Project. So your continued support and the city's continued funding of that program, so that when we return to court, in whatever that looks like, we can both continue to provide legal services to vulnerable populations and maybe even continue to assist them in a diversion program. Hopefully we get a diversion program that we can support for individual tenants who need it throughout the city of Philadelphia. Small correction to their general intake number, it's 215-587-3158. So 215-587-3158. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you find this useful. The video is on Facebook and it will be available on YouTube after today's presentation. We encourage you to come back next week for another inspiring and hopefully informative conversation on Tenant Tuesdays at 2. And thank you for your support. And thank you, Shari, for being here.
Okay, thank you, Kadeem.
No problem.